Look, I never wanted to be an intergalactic cultural advisor. The position didn't even exist until 3 standard cycles ago, when the Galactic Council realized they needed someone to explain why humans kept accidentally starting wars by being too polite. I'm Ambassador Jack Murphy, though most species call me Quick Fix, a nickname I earned after preventing an interstellar incident by convincing the Zephyrian delegation that humans weren't declaring war when they said break a leg to the performing arts troupe. The thing is, most alien species take everything literally. And I mean everything. Try explaining to a silicon-based life form that when Admiral Rodriguez says I would love nothing more than to continue this delightful conversation, what she actually means is if you don't stop talking, I'm going to spacewalk you out the nearest airlock. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You're probably wondering how I ended up writing the galaxy's most important diplomatic handbook. It all started during First Contact, when humanity's initial message to the Galactic Council was, "We come in peace and look forward to engaging in mutually beneficial dialogue." The Council immediately mobilized their entire defense fleet. You see, in their experience, any species that opens with such a formally polite greeting is usually about to annex half a sector. The MRRP Empire did it. The Qlari Collective did it. Even the usually straightforward Blargs did it. The Council had learned their lesson: the more polite the initial contact, the more likely you were about to lose several planets to your new friends. What they didn't understand was that humans are just weird. We're the only known species that uses sarcasm as a form of affection, considers passive aggressiveness an art form, and thinks saying with all due respect before an insult somehow makes it diplomatically acceptable. I was just a junior diplomatic aide when the Council's fleet arrived in Earth's orbit. Everyone expected the usual First Contact protocol: formal introductions, exchange of cultural information, maybe some light trade negotiations. Instead, they immediately demanded our surrender. The UN Security Council's response: they invited the Galactic Council representatives to a friendly cup of tea to discuss this unfortunate misunderstanding. The aliens nearly had a collective panic attack. In their defense database, offering beverages during a military standoff was classified as extreme diplomatic aggression. Level 5-3 battlecruisers immediately jumped to hyperspace. That's when I made my career-defining move. While everyone else was trying to figure out why the aliens were retreating, I managed to hack into their cultural database. Turns out their security password was still set to password in Standard Galactic. What I found was fascinating: centuries of documented cases where incredibly polite species turned out to be the most dangerous. I grabbed the emergency broadcast channel and said, "Hey, you got it all wrong. We're not being polite because we're planning to attack. We're being polite because we're genuinely kind of awkward and don't know what else to do. Look, want proof? Here's how humans actually talk to our friends." I then proceeded to play them recordings of my last family dinner, where my relatives spent 2 hours roasting each other while simultaneously passing the mashed potatoes. The Council was fascinated. Here was a species that showed affection through mild insults, diffused tension with self-deprecating humor, and only became worryingly polite when they were genuinely angry. We were completely backwards from every other known civilization. Within a day, the crisis was over. Within a week, I was appointed as the first human diplomatic translation officer. Within a month, after preventing 3 more almost wars caused by human idioms, I was promoted to cultural advisor to the Galactic Council. And that's why I'm writing this guide. Because let's face it, humans aren't going to change, and the galaxy needs to learn how to interpret us before we accidentally start a war by being too nice, or end up in an actual war because nobody realized that when we say let's agree to disagree, we really mean I think you're an idiot, but I'm not allowed to say that in a diplomatic setting. So let's begin with the basics. And remember, the nicer a human is being, the faster you should probably run. The first thing you need to understand about human diplomatic language is that nothing means what it actually means. I learned this the hard way during the infamous caffeine incident at our first major summit with the Galactic Council. Let me introduce you to Diplomat Velthara of the Centaurian Confederation. Picture, if you will, a 7-foot-tall mantis-like being who takes every single word literally and has memorized all 47,892 volumes of galactic protocol. Velthara makes other bureaucrats look spontaneous. They once spent 3 days analyzing the proper protocol for responding to a human sneeze. So there we were, in the middle of crucial trade negotiations, when Admiral Rodriguez made what she thought was a harmless suggestion: perhaps we could all use some coffee. Velthara immediately declared a Class 3 diplomatic emergency. You see, in their database, the word perhaps in diplomatic speech translates to do this or face consequences. They thought the admiral was threatening biological warfare through caffeine exposure. It didn't help that their scans showed coffee to be a mind-altering substance. I spent the next 4 hours explaining that humans don't actually function without coffee. And no, we weren't all part of a stimulant-dependent death cult. Though trying to explain human coffee culture to aliens did make me question that last part. But that was just the beginning. Let me share 3 of my favorite human diplomatic suggestion disasters. First, we had the just a thought incident. Ambassador Chen casually mentioned to the Draconid delegation that it's just a thought, but maybe pointing planet-destroying weapons at your neighbors isn't the best way to make friends. The Draconids immediately disarmed their entire defense fleet. Turns out, in their culture, prefacing a statement with just a thought means this is an absolute command that will be enforced with extreme prejudice. They thought Earth was threatening them with extinction. We decided not to correct their interpretation of that one. Then there was the I'm no expert catastrophe. During a technical exchange, Dr. Martinez started a sentence with I'm no expert, but before explaining her theory on quantum linguistics. The alien scientists took this as a formal declaration of supreme expertise and immediately added her theory to their textbooks as unquestionable fact. Somewhere out there, there's an alien university teaching quantum linguistics based on what was essentially scientific sarcasm. But my personal favorite was the up to you debacle. Captain Lee told the Arxian ambassador it was totally up to you whether they wanted to join the human Arxian cultural exchange program. The Arxians spent the next month in panic mode, believing they were being subjected to some sort of cruel human test where they had to guess the right answer or face diplomatic ruin. This brings us to an important point about human suggestions. The more casual they sound, the more serious they probably are. When a human says you might want to consider, what they actually mean is do this immediately. When they say it's really your call, they mean there's only one right choice and you better make it. And when they say whatever works best for you, they've already decided what works best and are just waiting for you to figure it out. Velthara actually created a translation matrix for human suggestions. It's now required reading for all new diplomatic staff. My favorite entry is their translation for I'm just spitballing here, which they've officially classified as warning human is about to propose something either brilliant or catastrophic. Prepare for either outcome. The matrix also includes a panic scale for human pleasantries. That's an interesting idea. Ranks as a level 2 diplomatic warning translation. That idea is terrible, and I'm trying to be nice about it. We should definitely discuss this further. Ranks as a level 4 translation. This conversation is over, but I'm too polite to say so. And let's put a pin in that. Ranks as a level 5 diplomatic emergency translation. This idea should be launched into the nearest sun. The really tricky part is that humans genuinely don't realize they're doing this. We've evolved such complex layers of social nicety that we don't even recognize them anymore. It's like trying to explain water to a fish. We're so immersed in it that we can't even see it. Which is why I'm writing this guide. Because trust me, you haven't seen real diplomatic confusion until you've watched an alien ambassador try to decode whether we should grab coffee sometime as a genuine invitation, or just a polite human goodbye. Spoiler alert, even we don't know the answer to that one. Let me tell you about Admiral Helena Iron Lady Rodriguez. Picture the kind of person who could stare down a supernova and make it blink first. She's the most diplomatic person I know, right up until the moment she isn't. And that's where our story about the phrase with all due respect begins. The Krax Empire had been pushing their luck for months. Think space peacocks with superiority complexes and enough firepower to back up their attitude. They'd been encroaching on human space, claiming it was all just a navigational misunderstanding. Right. Now, the Krax had evaluated humanity's military capabilities and concluded we weren't a threat. Their probability matrices gave us a 0.01% chance of winning any conflict. The problem with their calculations? They didn't factor in that humans don't actually care about probability when we're angry enough. The situation came to a head during what I now call the conference room confrontation. Picture this: a sterile meeting room on Ganymede Station, decorated in that universal bureaucratic style that somehow manages to be boring in 7 different dimensions. The Krax ambassador, Supreme Commander ZK Tall, was sitting there with 6 of his advisors, all of them preening their iridescent head feathers in that insufferably smug way they had. That's when Admiral Rodriguez walked in. I knew we were in trouble because she was smiling. Here's something crucial about humans that aliens never seem to grasp: when we smile during tense diplomatic situations, it's not because we're happy. It's because we're trying very hard not to throw someone out an airlock. The Admiral sat down, still smiling, and said those fateful words, "With all due respect, Supreme Commander." I immediately hit the emergency warning button under the table. In the 3 seconds it took her to finish her sentence, 4 different alien species had already begun evacuation procedures from the station. They'd learned. ... But if your ships cross that border one more time, I will personally ensure that the Krax Empire becomes the galaxy's most expensive collection of space confetti. The Krax translator had a meltdown trying to process this. See, in their culture, prefacing a threat with all due respect should have negated the hostile intent. Their diplomatic AI spent 20 minutes trying to figure out if this was a declaration of war or an invitation to dinner. What followed was the most polite exchange of threats in human history. The Krax, completely confused by human diplomatic doublespeak, tried to counter with their own version of politeness. "We acknowledge your concerns with the utmost courtesy," Zetaal replied, his feathers rippling in what he thought was an intimidating display. Rodriguez's smile got even wider. "I'm delighted you understand. Please don't mistake my exceptional manners for lack of resolve. Your position has been noted with all the consideration it deserves," Zetaal preened. "I'm so glad we're having this productive dialogue about the consequences of your future actions." By this point, even the station's AI had taken shelter. The level of politeness in the room had exceeded all known safety parameters. That's when I decided to step in before they killed us all with courtesy. "Right, let me translate for everyone. Admiral Rodriguez has just promised to turn your fleet into a very expensive light show if you don't back off. Supreme Commander Zetaal, you've just implied that you don't think she'll do it." Admiral Rodriguez's last statement was essentially a promise that she absolutely will. Does that clear things up? The Krax delegation's feathers all flattened at once, their equivalent of a jaw drop. They'd finally realized that human diplomatic language operates on inverse politeness. The more polite we are, the more likely we are about to do something extremely impolite with a capital ship. This is why I've had to add an entire chapter to the diplomatic handbook about the phrase "with all due respect." It includes a mathematical formula that aliens can use to calculate just how much trouble they're in, based on how politely a human is speaking to them. The basic rule is this: take the formal politeness level of a human statement, multiply it by 10, and that's roughly how many minutes you have to get out of their space before things get interesting. If they start using terms like distinguished colleague or esteemed friend, just run. Don't pack. Don't check out. Just run. The Krax, to their credit, finally got the message. They withdrew their ships so fast they nearly caused a traffic jam in hyperspace. To this day, their diplomatic manual has a specific warning: if a human begins a sentence with all due respect, immediately calculate the fastest escape route. The funny thing is, humans genuinely think we're being diplomatic in these situations. We really believe that if we wrap our threats in enough layers of politeness, it somehow makes them more civilized. We're the only species in the galaxy that thinks adding "no offense" but before an insult somehow makes it not an insult. And Admiral Rodriguez? She still insists she was being perfectly reasonable and diplomatic that day. I didn't even mention the antimatter torpedoes, she told me later, seemingly genuinely puzzled by why everyone had been so alarmed. This, folks, is why I drink. Let me introduce you to Chief Protocol Officer P. Tink of the Galactic Council. Imagine a floating cloud of bioluminescent gas that changes color based on emotional state. P. Tink was assigned to study human nonverbal communication, and I'm pretty sure we drove them to the point of considering a career change to asteroid mining. The problem with human body language is that we've evolved to be simultaneously obvious and incomprehensible. Take the eye roll, for example. P. Tink spent 3 months studying this phenomenon, trying to understand why humans occasionally rotate their visual organs upward during conversations. Their first theory was that we were attempting to scan for aerial predators. Their second theory was that we were performing some sort of ritual eye exercise. Their third theory, which they presented to the Council in a 400-page report, was that humans were trying to communicate with orbital satellites using Morse code through eye movements. The truth that we roll our eyes to express exasperation practically caused a diplomatic incident. P. Tink's color shifted to what I can only describe as confused puce, as they demanded to know how expressing disagreement by briefly pretending to pass out could possibly be considered an effective form of communication. But that was nothing compared to their study of the human smile. Here's the thing about smiles: we're the only species in the known galaxy that bears their teeth as both a friendly greeting and a threat display. P-Tink's confusion reached new heights when they realized that the exact same facial expression could mean either "I'm delighted to meet you" or "I'm imagining how satisfying it would be to space you out the nearest airlock." Their observation log from that period is now required reading at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy. My favorite entry reads, "Human diplomatic pattern 47. The wider the smile during negotiations, the more likely violence is to occur. Paradox: humans claim to be happy while displaying clear signs of imminent aggressive behavior. Conclusion: humans are terrifying." And then there's the head nod. Oh, the great misunderstanding of the human head nod nearly caused 3 separate diplomatic crises in 1 week. You see, most species communicate agreement or disagreement by releasing specific pheromones. The idea of indicating your feelings by giving yourself minor whiplash was completely alien to them. Even worse, they discovered that a head nod doesn't always mean yes. Sometimes it means "I'm listening," sometimes it means "I hear you, but I don't agree," and sometimes, most confusingly of all, it means "I stopped listening 5 minutes ago, but I don't want to be rude." P-Tink actually created a classification system for human nods. The quick single nod, basic acknowledgement. The slow double nod, deep contemplation or complete disbelief. The continuous rapid nod, either extreme agreement or a desperate desire for the other person to stop talking. The side head tilt nod, complete confusion disguised as understanding. Their research took a particularly interesting turn when they discovered the phenomenon, the human habit of making nonsense noises while nodding. P-Tink spent 2 weeks trying to decode what they thought was a secret audio language, only to discover we're basically just making printer noises to show we're still awake. But the real breakthrough in their research came during what we now call the passive-aggressive incident. An human ambassador was having a disagreement with a Volparian delegate. Instead of releasing warning pheromones or displaying traditional threat behaviors, the ambassador just stood there, arms crossed, eyebrows raised, head tilted slightly to the left, smiling in that particular way humans do when we're about to make someone regret their life choices. P-Tink's sensors went haywire. Every alien species in the room went into defensive postures. The Volparian delegate actually tried to call for emergency evacuation. Meanwhile, the human ambassador was just standing there, probably thinking they were being the very model of diplomatic restraint. That's when P-Tink made their groundbreaking discovery: human nonverbal communication isn't just a supplementary system, it's a whole separate language that often directly contradicts what we're actually saying. When a human says "fine" while crossing their arms and clenching their jaw, it's about as fine as a matter-antimatter containment breach. They've since developed a comprehensive guide to human nonverbal cues, which includes such gems as: if a human is tapping their fingers on the table, they're not keeping time to music, they're counting down to somebody's doom. A human looking up at the ceiling during your presentation isn't admiring the architecture. They're questioning every life choice that led them to this moment. If a human is smiling while receiving bad news, evacuate the sector. It's not happiness, it's weapons-grade sarcasm about to go critical. P-Tink eventually had to take a sabbatical to recover from their research. Last I heard, they were teaching a master class called Understanding Human Nonverbal Communication, a Survivor's Guide. The waiting list is 3 years long, and the course includes practical exercises in interpreting such complex human behaviors as the customer service smile and the diplomatic finger steepling of doom. They did leave us with one final observation in their report: humans are the only known species that can tell you to go extinct through facial expressions alone. Exercise extreme caution. I couldn't have said it better myself. The Arcturus station negotiations nearly ended in disaster because nobody recognized the warning signs. Well, nobody except me, and I was stuck in traffic on a transport shuttle because someone had forgotten to carry the zero in the artificial gravity calculations. Let me tell you how the most polite human diplomatic interaction nearly started an interstellar war. First, some context: the Crack's empire had been suspiciously quiet since their run-in with Admiral Rodriguez. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes experienced diplomats start updating their wills. That's when we received intelligence that they were secretly constructing something big near Arcturus Station. The council called an emergency session. The human delegation was led by Ambassador Marcus Wong, known throughout Earth diplomatic circles as the teddy bear because of his usually jovial personality and tendency to solve most conflicts with bad jokes and good food. The first warning sign came when Ambassador Wang didn't make a single pun during the preliminary introductions. The second came when he offered the Cracks delegation their choice of seats. The third, and if anyone had been paying attention, this should have set off every alarm in the station, was when he said, "Thank you so much for coming. We really do appreciate your time." Let me be clear, Ambassador Wang had never seriously thanked anyone for anything in his entire diplomatic career. His standard greeting was usually along the lines of, "Well, look what the solar wind dragged in," followed by finger guns. The Cracks delegation, having failed to read my recently published emergency protocols for excessive human politeness, took this as a sign of weakness. Big mistake. Huge. That's when the tea incident happened. Ambassador Wang personally served tea to the Cracks delegation. Not coffee, tea, in actual fine china cups that he'd apparently brought specifically for this purpose. Now, I was finally approaching the station when I received the emergency alert: human diplomat exhibiting extreme politeness. Situation critical. I've never seen a shuttle pilot break so many speed regulations. By the time I arrived, Wang was complimenting the Supreme Commander's new feather arrangement and asking politely about his family's health. The Cracks were preening, thinking they had the upper hand. The other alien diplomats were quietly engaging their species' equivalent of panic attacks. See, here's what the Cracks didn't understand: humans only become unfailingly polite in diplomatic situations when we're about to do something extremely impolite. It's like we're preemptively apologizing for the diplomatic incident we're about to cause. I burst into the conference room just as Wang was offering the Supreme Commander a biscuit and saying, "I truly hate to be a bother, but I was wondering if you might possibly explain something to me." That's 5 politeness markers in one sentence. According to my scale, we were approximately 30 seconds from either a declaration of war or something even worse, a strongly worded letter. You see, Wang continued, stirring his tea with the kind of precision usually reserved for disarming nuclear devices, "I'm ever so curious about that lovely new construction project of yours near the Arcturus defensive perimeter. The one you forgot to mention to anyone." The Supreme Commander's feathers began to ripple uncertainly. They were finally starting to realize that something was wrong, but they couldn't quite figure out what. "I don't suppose," Wang took a deliberately gentle sip of tea, "you would be so kind as to explain why it looks remarkably similar to a long-range planetary bombardment platform?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Wang placed his cup back in its saucer with the delicacy of someone handling antimatter. "Because if it is what it appears to be, I would be deeply grateful if you could remove it within the next 24 hours. I would hate for there to be any unfortunate misunderstandings." The way he said "unfortunate misunderstandings" made several potted plants in the room spontaneously wilt. That's when I stepped in, because I recognized the signs of imminent British-level politeness escalation. "Right," I announced, "what Ambassador Wang is trying to say with all this politeness is that if that station isn't gone in 24 hours, he's going to personally ensure that it becomes the galaxy's largest collection of modern art." "I would never say such a thing," Wang smiled, somehow managing to make it sound like the most terrifying threat in diplomatic history. "I'm simply expressing my sincere hope that our friends in the Cracks Empire will make the right decision. More tea, anyone?" The Cracks delegation left so fast they created a new speed record for emergency diplomatic withdrawals. The construction project was dismantled within 12 hours. Later, when I asked Wang about his unusually polite behavior, he just smiled and said, "Sometimes, my dear colleague, the best way to tell someone to go flush themselves out an airlock is to offer them a properly brewed cup of tea first." The incident led to the creation of the Wang scale of diplomatic doom, which measures the severity of a situation based on how polite the human diplomat is being. It goes from level 1 normal human rudeness situation nominal to level 10 offering freshly baked scones immediate evacuation required. We also added a new section to the diplomatic handbook: if a human diplomat starts being excessively nice to you, check the following: 1. Are you about to die? 2. Are they about to start a war? 3. Is it Tuesday? The really fun part: other species now try to copy this technique, but they haven't quite got the hang of it. Last week, a Vulparian diplomat tried to threaten sanctions by aggressively complimenting everyone's choice of furniture. It was adorable. Looking back on all these incidents, I feel it's my duty to provide some final, concrete guidelines for surviving diplomatic relations with humans. Consider this your emergency checklist for human interactions. First, let's establish the key warning signs that a human is about to do something spectacularly dramatic. They suddenly become extremely polite. This is like a cobra raising its hood. By the time you see it, it's almost too late. They start smiling during serious discussions. This isn't happiness. This is their facial muscles attempting to contain something that's about to make everyone's insurance premiums go up. They begin any sentence with "look." This word is basically the diplomatic equivalent of rolling up your sleeves before a bar fight. They say "fair enough" in response to your argument. Translation: they think you're wrong and are about to prove it in a way that will probably violate several laws of physics. Remember the cracks incident? Well, here's what actually happened. After they dismantled their secret station, they tried to save face by claiming it was all a misunderstanding, that the structure was actually a cultural exchange center. Ambassador Wong's response? He smiled even wider and invited them to build it right next to Earth instead, so we can better appreciate your culture. They declined. Actually, according to official records, their exact response was error, unable to process level of passive aggression. Retreat recommended. This brings me to the resolution of our ongoing crack situation. After the Arcturus station incident, they finally figured out that human diplomatic patterns don't follow any logical progression they could understand. They submitted a formal request to the Galactic Council to have all human diplomatic interactions translated into interpretive dance instead, claiming it would be less confusing. The Council denied their request, largely because they were afraid of what interpretive dance versions of human diplomatic threats would look like. Also, there was concern that humanity would actually agree to it, and nobody wanted to see Ambassador Wong's interpretation of "remove your battle station or else" in contemporary ballet form. Instead, the Council made this guide mandatory reading for all species engaging in diplomatic relations with humans. They even added a helpful appendix titled "Common Human Phrases and Why They Should Terrify You." Some of my favorite entries include: let's handle this like adults, prepare for behavior that is distinctly not adult-like. I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed. They are absolutely angry, and you should probably evacuate the system. We need to talk universal diplomatic code for something is about to go very wrong. That's an interesting perspective. Your idea is about to be diplomatically eviscerated. With the greatest respect, no respect is coming. Only pain. The guide has been so successful that it's now being translated into 47 different languages, including 3 that are entirely based on interpretive crystal formation patterns. The hive mind collective of Betelgeuse actually incorporated it into their genetic memory, meaning every new drone is born with an instinctive understanding of why they should worry when a human says "no offense, but." As for me, I'm still here, preventing diplomatic incidents one misunderstood idiom at a time. Last week I had to explain to the Centaurian delegation why "it's all downhill from here" is actually a positive statement. The week before that, I prevented an interstellar incident by clarifying that when humans say "yeah, right," they usually mean "no, wrong." The really funny part is that humans are starting to read this guide too. Ambassador Wong told me he's been using it as a reference for how to be more effectively passive-aggressive in his diplomatic communications. Admiral Rodriguez has it bookmarked at the section about smile variations and their threat levels. So here's my final advice for surviving human diplomatic relations. When in doubt, assume any human being unusually nice to you is about to do something that will end up in this guide's 2nd edition. And if they offer you tea, run. Don't walk, don't pack, don't even finish reading this sentence. Just run. Oh, and one last thing, if you're reading this, Supreme Commander ZK Taal, Ambassador Wong wanted me to tell you that he simply loves what you've done with your new defense fleet. He also mentioned something about hoping to have another lovely chat soon. I'd start running if I were you. End of guide. Addendum: this guide is now required reading at the Galactic Diplomatic Academy. The final exam consists of 1 question. A human diplomat smiles and offers you tea. Explain in detail how thoroughly doomed you are.